Growing up, I never envisioned the twists and turns my life would take. My name is Julie, and this is my journey. Born to hardworking farmers, I learned the value of diligence early on. My childhood was a blend of school days followed by afternoons spent helping on the farm. Weekends were reserved for family gatherings and chores, simple yet profoundly fulfilling times. Graduating from high school marked a significant shift in my life's trajectory. My parents, always envisioning a brighter future for me, encouraged me to pursue higher education. "Julie," my father said one evening at dinner, "your mother and I believe you should experience more than farm life. Consider college." Their words opened a new chapter for me, leading me to a bustling city that felt like a different universe compared to the quiet rhythm of rural life. College was not just about academics. It introduced me to diverse individuals with bold ambitions and stories. It was there I met Terry, a charismatic guy who saw life as a grand adventure. Unlike the farm boys I knew, Terry dreamed of a life free from the drudgery of hard work, a life filled with enjoyment and leisure. I was enchanted. Terry's perspective on life was invigorating, and soon we were inseparable. Our relationship progressed quickly, and discussions of marriage began. When I shared the news with my parents, they were hesitant, yet supportive. They insisted on meeting Terry, wanting to understand the man who had captured my heart. Although my father expressed some reservations, I dismissed them, blinded by love and the excitement of a new life. Thanks to my parents' generosity, Terry and I had a beautiful wedding, and they even helped us settle into an apartment in the city. "We want you to start on solid ground," my mother said, her eyes teary as I hugged them, promising to make them proud. The initial years of marriage seemed perfect. Terry and I established our lives in the city, embracing the routine we had built together. However, as time passed, subtle signs of discord emerged. Terry often complained about visits to my parents' farm, disliking the chores and the rural smells. I overlooked these comments, attributing them to his urban upbringing. 3 years into our marriage, I became pregnant. While I was thrilled, Terry's lukewarm reaction hinted at underlying reservations. I hoped it was merely an initial shock and that he would grow into the idea of fatherhood. My parents, ever supportive, showered us with more help, from a new car to vacations. As I reflect on those days, I recognize the signs I had missed. Signs that perhaps should have alerted me to deeper issues in our seemingly perfect life. The journey I embarked upon, influenced by the dreams and hopes of my parents and intertwined with Terry's different worldview, taught me about life's unpredictable nature and the complex tapestry of relationships. Terry took our parents' help for granted, often commenting dismissively, "That's what parents are for." When our son Russell was born, I was absolutely enchanted by him. Terry tried his best, but adapting to fatherhood seemed a struggle for him. He would often get frustrated during Russell's nighttime cries, saying, "Can't you keep him quiet?" Some of us have to work in the morning. I tried to keep the peace, reminding myself that both of us were still adjusting to being parents. Our visits to the farm became less frequent and more strained as Terry's reluctance grew. He would complain bitterly whenever my dad asked for his help with the farm chores, especially if it involved fixing the tractor. "I'm not a mechanic, for Christ's sake," he would protest. Yet my dad remained patient, guiding him through each step, while Terry clumsily handled the tools, clearly out of his element. Then, within a year, tragedy struck. Both of my parents passed away suddenly. Devastated, I found little comfort in Terry's awkward attempts to console me. "It'll be okay," he'd say, patting my back. His next words, however, stunned me. At least they left us the farm. It was clear his mind was on the inheritance rather than our loss. In the wake of my grief, Terry suggested we sell the farm. "We could buy a big house in the city and live like kings," he proposed one evening over dinner. I was too worn down by grief and the demands of motherhood to argue. Reluctantly, I agreed, thinking perhaps it was best to support my husband. With a few signatures, my family's legacy was sold off to the highest bidder. The sale proceeds went into our joint account, and Terry was ecstatic. "We're set for life, Julie," he exclaimed, thrilled at the prospect of no longer needing to work hard. We reduced our work hours, and initially it felt like we were living a dream. However, as time passed, I noticed Terry's diminishing motivation. He began quitting jobs frequently, always blaming his bosses or the job demands. "I'm not a slave," he'd argue whenever I expressed concern about our finances. "Relax, Julie. We're set for life. Why work ourselves to death?" Meanwhile, Russell grew up, graduated from high school and college, and started his own life, making me both proud and a bit lonely without him around. One day, while reading the newspaper, I spotted an article about a successful concrete production plant owned by Terry's Uncle Willie. Excited, I called out to Terry, "Did you see this article about your Uncle Willie?" His reaction was harsh and immediate. "I don't want to hear about that old tyrant," he snapped. I knew the story, or at least Terry's version of it, about how his parents had died, leaving him with mixed feelings about his extended family. As I looked at Terry, I realized how much of our lives had been shaped by his outlook and how much I had conceded to his desires over the years. It made me ponder the true cost of the choices we had made together. Terry was just a boy when he lost his parents, and his Uncle Willie took him in. Over the years, Terry had painted a picture of Willie as a domineering and unyielding man who tried to steer Terry into the family business without regard for his nephew's desires. "He never listened to what I wanted," Terry had confided in me long ago. "It was always about what he thought was best, so I left to start my own life." Now, seeing Terry in his robe well into the afternoon, a part of me wondered if there was more to his story than he let on. One day, as I watched him recline casually, I suggested, "Maybe it's time to make peace, Terry." "It's been years. People change." His response was immediate and fierce. "Make peace with that control freak? No way in hell, Julie. Just drop it." I let the topic go, but Terry's intense reaction troubled me. It revealed a deep well of anger and resentment, and it made me question what other burdens he might be carrying and what other parts of his story were yet unseen. One quiet Sunday, I overheard Terry on the phone speaking tersely. "I am not interested in his life, and it does not concern me," he snapped before hanging up. Curious, I asked, "Who is that, honey?" His expression blank, he replied, "Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he kicks the bucket, at least I'll finally get something out of him." I was shocked by his callousness. "Terry, that's a terrible thing to say. He raised you." "Yeah, and made my life hell," he retorted, settling back with the TV remote. Watching him, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without saying a word, I went to our room and called our son Russell. "Hey, sweetie," I greeted him. "How would you feel about meeting your great uncle?" Russell was taken aback but agreed. An hour later, we were at the hospital, my heart pounding as we entered the intensive care unit. The room was filled with the quiet beeps of machines and soft voices. There, looking small and frail in his hospital bed surrounded by monitors, was Uncle Willie. He was nothing like the tyrannical figure Terry had described. When we introduced ourselves, his eyes welled up with tears. "Julie, Russell," he said, his voice weak but filled with warmth. "Oh, I've wanted to meet you for so long." During our visit, Willie shared his version of the past. He spoke of how he had taken in Terry after his parents' death and raised him as his own. "I love that boy," Willie said, his voice cracking. "I wanted him to have everything, to continue the family business, to have a good life. But Terry had other plans. He said he didn't want the responsibility," Willie continued. "He didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up nights worrying about the business." My heart sank as I listened. Willie's portrayal was uncomfortably familiar. "Terry demanded I sell the business," Willie added, shaking his head. "He wanted me to set him up with a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car. Said I owed him a carefree life." As I absorbed Willie's words, I realized how much of Terry's character remained hidden from me, shaded by his narratives and resentments. Seeing the shock on Russell's face, I realized he was as stunned as I was by Uncle Willie's revelations. "That's not how life works," Willie continued, his voice filled with disappointment. He explained how he had pleaded with Terry to stay and learn the business, but Terry had refused, arrogantly claiming he would marry rich and never need to work a day in his life. As I sat in the hospital room listening to Willie, memories from the past decade began to resurface, assembling like puzzle pieces into a clearer picture. Terry had always chosen part-time jobs, frequently called in sick, and took excessive days off. I had excused his behavior as stress or him being a free spirit, but the painful truth was now glaringly obvious. Terry had often said, "Life is for pleasure, Julie. Why should we kill ourselves working?" I felt a wave of nausea as I realized he hadn't married me out of love, but for the financial security he thought my family could provide. I was merely the wealthy bride he had boasted to his uncle he would secure. Tears welled up in my eyes as I grappled with the profound deceit at the foundation of our life together. Our marriage, our family, everything was built on a lie. Uncle Willie, sensing my distress, apologized. "I'm so sorry," his voice frail. "I wanted to leave something for you and Russell, but I can't." "It's okay," I reassured him, squeezing his hand gently. Willie grew more agitated as he spoke of his unfinished plans and a project that could have been transformative had he more time. Suddenly he grimaced in pain, and the machines around him beeped alarmingly. A nurse rushed in, urging us to leave. A few days later, Uncle Willie passed away. When I informed Terry, his reaction chilled me to the core. "Finally," he exclaimed with a grin, "took the old bastard long enough." I stared at him in disgust. "Terry, he was your uncle. He raised you." Terry dismissed it flippantly. "Yeah, so? When's the funeral? Do we have to go to that?" In the end, Terry didn't attend the funeral. Russell and I organized a small, dignified service, one I hoped would have made Uncle Willie proud. Meanwhile, Terry stayed home, eagerly talking about the inheritance. "The factory's got to be worth at least $20 million, he boasted on the phone. "Can you believe it? I'm rich." Watching him celebrate, I felt nothing but revulsion. Then, things deteriorated further. One evening, Terry coldly remarked, "You know, Julie, you're getting kind of old for me. I think I'm ready for an upgrade." His words were like a slap. I stood there, stunned. "Excuse me?" I managed to say. He shrugged, unashamed. "You heard me." His blunt cruelty was the last straw, revealing the full extent of the stranger he had become, or perhaps had always been. The man I had married, the partner I thought I knew, was just a facade. Now, faced with the harsh reality, I had to decide what to do next in this unexpected chapter of my life. As the weeks passed, Terry's behavior grew increasingly troubling. He would return home in the early hours, reeking of alcohol and perfume, often with lipstick stains on his collar. Each time I confronted him, he'd dismiss me harshly. "Mind your own business," he'd snap. "You should be grateful I come home at all." Lying awake at night, listening to the sound of Terry stumbling in, I realized I couldn't continue living this way. I deserved better, but I also needed to uncover the truth about Terry, about our finances, and about the life we thought we had built together. One morning, after another night of Terry returning at dawn, I confronted him. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and pain. He glared at me, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "None of your damn business, Julie. You should be grateful I come back at all." His words felt like a slap. "Grateful? Is that what you think our marriage is?" I asked, stunned by his callousness. He ignored my question, instead eyeing me calculatingly. "Say, how much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right?" His abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. "Terry, we've spent it all. The accounts are empty," I replied, my voice faltering. His face contorted into an ugly sneer. "Empty? You've got to be kidding me." He paced the room, muttering to himself, then turned back to me, his expression cold. "Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here. Done with you." Before I could respond, the front door opened and Russell walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Terry's demeanor shifted instantly. He plastered on a fake smile and approached our son. "Russell, my boy, just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me," he said, pulling out a document. "It's just a formality. You're renouncing any claim to Uncle Willie's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway." Russell looked at me, confusion in his eyes, but after my nod, he signed the document without hesitation. Terry's grin was triumphant as he snatched back the document. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he turned back to me, all pretense gone. "I want a divorce," he announced, his voice cold and flat. "I never loved you, Julie. I just tolerated you for your parents' money. But now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore." His words struck me like physical blows. "I'm moving to Uncle Willie's house," Terry continued, already pulling out a suitcase. "Don't try to contact me. It's over." And just like that, he was gone. 25 years of marriage packed away in a suitcase and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. "Mom?" Russell's voice was soft, filled with concern. "Are you okay?" I turned to my son, my rock, and as he wrapped his arms around me, the dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as he held me tight. "It's okay, Mom," he murmured. "We'll get through this. You're strong. You'll be okay." As I clung to my son, sobbing into his shoulder, a small part of me marveled at the man he had become, kind, compassionate, everything his father wasn't. As I whispered to Russell, "You're the best thing he ever did," I realized he was the only good thing to come out of my marriage. Russell held me tighter, and in that embrace I felt reassured that no matter what the future held, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together we would face whatever challenges came our way. The weeks following Terry's departure were tough and filled with pain and disbelief. I tried to stay strong and focus on moving forward, but it was hard, especially as Terry seemed intent on flaunting his new life. His Facebook timeline was suddenly filled with images of Uncle Willie's mansion, his new residence. I tried to ignore it, to concentrate on my healing, but then the photos took a new turn. A young blonde woman began appearing beside him, barely older than Russell. In one particularly jarring post, Terry had his arm around her, both grinning at the camera, with the caption, "Meet my fiancée, Denise. Upgrade complete." The calls started almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, and even Russell's old school teachers were all asking questions I couldn't, or didn't want to, answer. "Julie, dear, is everything okay? We saw Terry's posts. What's going on? Are you and Terry really?" Overwhelmed by the humiliation and constant reminders of Terry's betrayal, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Terry and asked to meet, after first consulting with a lawyer. On the day of our meeting, I arrived at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Terry swaggered in with Denise on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 22, her face caked with makeup, giggling at something Terry had whispered. "Well, well," Terry sneered, pulling out a chair for Denise, "if it isn't the old ball and chain. Denise, honey, meet Julie, the starter wife." Denise's pitying glance was infuriating, but I maintained my composure. "I have the divorce papers here," I said, sliding them across the table. "I'm not asking for much, just the house. You can keep everything else." To my surprise, Terry picked up the pen without argument. "Fine, have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now," he declared, hastily scrawling his signature. He then turned to Denise, his voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Now I can finally be with someone I truly love, someone worthy of me." I collected the papers, my hands shaking slightly. As I walked out of the cafe, I heard Terry's mocking laughter, but I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed the divorce papers. Handing them over to the court clerk, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a way of delivering justice in unexpected forms. For me, it came through a headline splashed across the local newspaper. Local business tycoon's empire crumbles. Nephew left with massive debt. It turned out Uncle Willie had taken out a huge loan just before his death, hoping to expand the business. He had mentioned a new project during our hospital visit, but Russell and I hadn't grasped the full implications at the time. Now, the reality of it all was starkly clear. I watched from a distance as Terry's new life unraveled. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything. Yet he was still left with nearly $1 million in debt. The icing on the cake? His young bride, Denise, packed her bags and left the moment she realized Terry was far from the wealthy man she had thought he was. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Terry. Then, on a rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. Opening it, I found Terry standing there, a shadow of the smug, wealthy man who had left me months earlier. He was disheveled, his eyes red and desperate. "Julie," he said, his voice cracking, "I've been such a fool. I see that now. Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. For the next hour, I listened as Terry poured out his regrets. He told me how he had lost everything and realized what truly mattered. "I was wrong, Julie," he confessed, his eyes pleading. "So wrong. But I see now that you were the only one who ever truly cared for me, the only one I've ever really loved." Then, to my utter disbelief, Terry got down on one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. "Julie, please give me another chance. Marry me again. Together we can overcome anything." For a moment, I was speechless. Then I did something that surprised even myself. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle and grew into full-blown, tears streaming down my face laughter. Terry's face fell. "What's so funny?" he demanded. When I finally caught my breath, I looked him straight in the eye. "Oh, Terry, did you really think it would be that easy? That you could treat me like garbage, throw me away, and then come crawling back when things got tough?" His expression darkened. "Now listen here," he snarled, jumping to his feet. "This is my house too. I have rights." I calmly walked to the drawer where I kept our divorce papers, pulling them out and showing him his signature. "No, Terry, you don't. You signed away any claim to this house. It's mine now. Get out, or I'll call the cops." For a moment I thought he might try to argue further, but the realization that he had no legal standing seemed to sink in. Terry stared at the divorce papers, then at me, and finally, with a scowl, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. As I watched him disappear into the rainy night, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life that included Terry was finally, decisively closed. Now it was time to move forward, with my son by my side and a future to rebuild. Something in my expression must have conveyed my resolve clearly because, without another word, Terry turned and stormed out, the door slamming shut behind him. Once he was gone, I immediately called Russell to tell him everything. My son was supportive as always. "You did the right thing, Mom," he assured me. "I'm proud of you." His words bolstered my spirits more than he could possibly know. In the weeks that followed, I faced some significant decisions. The house, filled with a mix of cherished and painful memories, suddenly seemed too large for just me. So I chose to sell it, using the proceeds to purchase a cozy apartment in a lively neighborhood I had always admired. At 55, I found myself embarking on a new chapter in life, one that was truly my own. I began traveling to places Terry and I had once talked about visiting, but never did. I took up painting, something I had always wanted to try, joined a local book club, and even started salsa dancing. These new activities brought fresh joy and vibrancy to my days. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of Terry around town. Time hadn't been kind to him. He looked older, clearly worn down by his mistakes and the rough turns his life had taken. Observing him, I felt a sense of closure and relief that my own life had taken a different path. Life hadn't unfolded as I'd once imagined, but looking back, I wouldn't have it any other way. Now, for the first time in many years, I felt truly, completely, happily myself. I embraced each new day with enthusiasm, grateful for the freedom to live life on my terms and the peace that came with knowing I had made the right decisions for myself.
I was concerned when I saw your house. Are you living off your pension? My daughter-in-law's voice dripped with sarcasm. It's enough for me to live a normal life, I replied, keeping my tone even despite her obvious provocation. But won't it eventually run out? Won't you end up coming to my parents' house for help? She pressed, her sharp tone daring me to react. I'd appreciate it if you stopped, I replied firmly. I've never even considered that. Oh, but it could happen any day now, couldn't it? Freya smirked, her mock concern unmistakable. Better for me to figure it all out while I still can. Her tone shifted abruptly. Do you think you can handle this? She demanded, leaving me confused. Before I could respond, she delivered the final blow. Because now I'm cutting ties with you, once and for all. Her declaration stunned me, but my daughter-in-law had no idea what she was about to face. My name is Gianna, and I am 62 years old. I live alone in an apartment in Irvine. My mother divorced shortly after I was born, so I grew up in a single-mother family. Fortunately, after the divorce, my father provided me with adequate support and cared for me until I entered college. After that, I joined a fairly reputable company, and my boss introduced me to my future husband, which eventually led to our arranged marriage. My son was born soon after, and we were enjoying our days together. But my husband died suddenly because of illness shortly after my son began working. My son's name is Zachary. He was an honest child who cared for me as a child, but his personality began to change when he entered college. His selfishness worsened after my husband died, and he would say things like, "I'm on my own now, so leave me alone." I'd say he's become more dependable, but I'm wondering if it's because I'm getting older that I'm feeling a little lonely. My son married the daughter of one of his client's presidents, whom he met through a business acquaintance. Her family seems to be a rich family, and they look down on my son, who comes from a single-mother family at first. But her father said, "Talking about family background nowadays is an anachronism. That is fine if you both agree." When I first visited her parents' home for the wedding ceremony, I was astounded by its size and magnificence. I then gave my son the house I was living in and moved into a new apartment that I purchased with my husband's inheritance. It is in Irvine, but I like the peace and quiet of the suburbs. My son's wife, Freya, had the temperament of a wealthy daughter from an old rich family. She seemed to look down on me, a divorced woman living in a small urban apartment. It felt like she assumed I was struggling financially and relying on a pension to get by. "I don't mean to be rude to you, but may I ask you a question?" she asked. "Yes, what is it?" I responded. "I'm afraid you have financial problems," my daughter-in-law said directly. "Thank you for your concern, but I've been able to make a decent living," I replied. "My family is quite prominent, and my father is the president of a well-known furniture manufacturing company. He's the CEO. Do you get what I mean?" Freya went on, casually boasting about her family as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Then, without hesitation, she asked, "So, do you think you'll be able to secure financial support?" "What do you mean?" I said, puzzled. "Oh, let me tell you frankly, I don't want our money going toward your living expenses," she stated coldly. She believed I was a poor woman who would be a burden on her family. "Oh, I never thought about it," I said hesitantly. "Perhaps not now, but you will, won't you?" my son's wife insisted. I was wondering what kind of education she got. "Oh well, thank you very much for your generosity, but you don't have to worry about that." "Keep that in mind," I replied firmly. She then walked away from me. Her reaction was unusual, and I could tell how bad her personality was. Sometime later, my son and his wife visited me. I made a lot of homemade dishes to keep them entertained, since my son returned after a while. My mother was from the Anaheim region, so I made light-flavored dishes. I made a vegetable stew and boiled some fish. My daughter-in-law is from the Palm Springs region, so she thought they were too bland and didn't taste good. "It's a pretty bad dish, Is there more meat or something? Freya asked critically. I'm sorry, I grew up near the sea, so I know how to cook fish, but not meat, I replied humbly. You had a very poor diet, didn't you? She added dismissively, brushing off my modesty. But I wasn't impoverished. I'm not sure how you define poor, but we weren't, Zachary replied. My son, who was standing nearby, unusually took my side. But it looks poor because there are only vegetables and fish. This vegetable soup was made from instant tofu and dried seaweed, my daughter-in-law said arrogantly. Her arrogance was unending. I don't make ready-made meals. I make it by myself, I replied angrily. But Mom, her family's meat dishes are excellent, my son interjected. Palm Springs has many brands of elite beef, and I'm now a big fan of it. I didn't understand what my son was thinking. He reversed his earlier opinion and followed up with his own wife. Her family, by the way, is living in a well-known area in Palm Springs for its elite beef. Go ahead and slice the premium beef. It's so tender you can almost cut it with chopsticks, and it just melts in your mouth, she said with a self-satisfied tone. Oh, my bad. You're used to having the finest cuts, aren't you? They're quite pricey, though, so I wouldn't expect them to be your thing, Freya added with a playful laugh, hiding her smile behind her hand. One day, I was invited to Freya's parents' home. Because it was the end of summer and there were a few tourists, I was asked if I wanted to come. It was my son's idea this time. I accepted the invitation because I had no plans and had not had the opportunity to visit Palm Springs. Despite the fact that it was an invitation, I brought some sweets from a long-established Irvine shop as a gift. Don't worry about it. I get tired of eating so much, but since I'm here, I'll receive it, Freya said sarcastically. My son's wife's sarcasm irritated me, but this is my in-laws' home. Except for me, everyone was an enemy. My in-laws' house was as beautiful as ever. They had renovated the garden and created a pond in which the carp swam gracefully. The carp cost approximately $1 million. They are few in number, but I chose quality over quantity. I counseled them, Freya's father boasted. His wife looked overjoyed. I was reminded of how much she shows off things. My son and his wife invited me to a luxury hot spring hotel nearby. I enjoyed their magnificent hot spring facilities, as well as the pride and joy of fine Kobe beef. I think I would have enjoyed it even more if there were none of Freya's usual sarcastic comments. Then, there was the time when we went to my in-laws' house to say thank you and goodbye, and we were all drinking tea together. Thank you very much for your assistance this time. I was able to enjoy the hot spring and delicious food because of you, I said, expressing gratitude. My thank you speech turned into a terrible situation. There's no need to thank me for that, my daughter-in-law said sharply. My son has been blessed with a wonderful family, and as his mother, I am grateful. Thank you very much, I added politely. I was concerned when I saw your house. Do you live with your pension? Freya continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. That's enough for me to live a normal life, I responded. But won't it eventually run out and force you to come to my parents' house for assistance? She asked provocatively. I'd appreciate it if you could refrain, I said, trying to remain calm, added firmly. I have never considered it. No, it could happen anytime soon, couldn't it? So I'd better get it figured out while I still could, she said with finality. She got on the main talk. Can you sort this out? She added. What do you mean? I replied, confused. I'm not a monster, my daughter-in-law said firmly. I invited you here to have one last good time with your son. Did you like it? Yes, it was enjoyable, I admitted. That makes me happy, Freya said, her tone shifting slightly. So I'm going to cut off a relationship with you once and for all. What? What do you mean? I asked, stunned. We would be greatly inconvenienced if you became a beggar, so we would prefer that you became a stranger, she explained coldly. Beggar? Stranger? I repeated her words, trying to comprehend. That's why I'm asking you to abandon us now, she continued. Do you get what I'm saying? I felt enraged by her condescending attitude, but managed to keep my emotions in check. I realized what you meant. If you wish that, I will do so, I said calmly. She seemed relieved by my response. Don't worry, I've already prepared the bus fare for your return trip. By then, my son's wife said sarcastically, adding insult to injury. Anyway, I just want to thank you for what you did this time. Thank you a lot. I said curtly before leaving. I returned to Irvine after those dismissive words. I was furious at what my son and his wife had done to me, but I didn't take any action. Then, in an attempt to de-stress, I traveled to Los Angeles, a city I adore. I've stopped sending money to my son for good since then. I had been giving him some of the dividends from my father's stock as pocket money, but I had no choice but to stop when he told me he was going to distance himself from me. My son begged me to keep giving him money, but I refused. I will no longer support you because we broke off our relationship, I told him firmly. Apparently, he hadn't informed his wife that I had been sending him money. Freya held his wallet tightly, and apparently, he had been spending my money on anime merchandise. When they got married, Freya threw away all of his prized possessions, and he gradually began collecting them again. Then, I heard that Freya's father had passed out. Fortunately, he survived, but due to his stroke, he could no longer work. My son and his wife assumed the roles of family governor and president. My daughter-in-law's family is quite wealthy, but their company's management was aggressive and unpopular. Since my son and his wife took over the company, it had been plagued with issues. Clients were dissatisfied with how the company was being run and stopped doing business with them. I would normally have gone to see her father because he was my daughter-in-law's father, but since I had been cut off, I did not. Freya has a similar personality to her father, so she probably conducts herself the same way. However, in my opinion, she does not appear to have much business acumen. I was concerned about her future. She is selfish and looks down on others. The company's sales have fallen as expected, and the new business she started failed to materialize, leaving them with even more debt. Sales of high-end furniture, the company's mainstay, remained slow, and it was clear that the company as a whole would lose money in the future. Despite my concerns, I decided to wait and see what happened. The company conducted a major reorganization, replacing the entire board of directors. My son, the new president, downsized the main business and established new divisions. It seemed the decision was made by Freya, the company's largest shareholder. My son, as the representative director, seemed almost invisible. It was clearly her way of doing things, and it turned out to be a big failure. Sales on the main business operations plummeted, and the new division performed far below expectations. The stock price dropped significantly as the company's performance deteriorated. The company's survival became doubtful as more employees, having lost hope, began resigning. I had been watching the stock price fall. Dividends were no longer paid. Quarterly reports and stock analysts' general comments were depressing. The company may be delisted soon, they warned. If the stock is delisted, it will be impossible to trade shares, and raising funds would become extremely difficult. Banks are unlikely to extend loans, leaving them with liquidation as the only option. Her parents owned local forests and properties, but they were in rural areas and unlikely to be worth much. Still, they had no choice but to sell them. I couldn't be bothered since I was cut off from them. I carried on with my life as before. My son and his wife contacted me several times, but I ignored them. While I was touring the LACMA museum, admiring the art galleries, I got a call from one of the staff members. "There's a visitor here to see you," he said. "Huh? I don't have an appointment, and only a few people know I'm here." "What is the visitor's name?" I asked. "Her name is Freya Miller," he replied. "Miller?" I paused, stunned. Then it hit me. "I know her. Please ask her to leave," I said. "She's very eager to see you," he added. "She even got down on her knees. How should I deal with this?" "Send her to the guest room," I sighed. "I'll return once I finish getting ready." I changed into something more appropriate before meeting her. "It's been a long time," I said, greeting her calmly. "I understand your family and I have been cutting off our relationship. What made you come here? I had no idea you'd go this far." "It's been a long time," Freya said, looking apologetic. "Thank you so much for forgiving me for all the disrespect I've shown you in the past." "What is this?" I asked sharply. "I'm not forgiving you. I only came to see you on a whim. Misunderstandings would make you difficult to think." No, she stammered, her voice shaky. "My words were too strong. I apologize." Her face was flushed with nervousness and my cold attitude. I've heard that you own this mansion. Can you tell me how you got this? My daughter-in-law asked. She must have heard something about my true identity somewhere. It was clear to me that she had come to me because she was desperate for money. That's none of your business, I said with a smile, dismissing her. This is my father's villa. It was given to me by my father, I added after a brief pause, deciding to speak clearly. Oh, who is your father? She inquired further. Jasper Hill. He's deceased, but don't you know him? I responded. What? Oh, the former president of Highland Commerce? So does that make you his daughter? She asked, visibly stunned by the revelation. Let me explain this in detail, I began. I am the daughter of his ex-wife, and I use my mother's surname. My half-brother is the current president of the company. My mother has already passed away, and I have distanced myself from the Hill family. My personality is not suited to business, so I delegated company management to my younger brother. I wanted to live quietly for the rest of my life, so I received a portion of the company shares as an advance from my father and got this house, I explained. I see, she said, seemingly understanding. Let me tell you about my current financial situation, I continued. As an inexperienced stockbroker, I don't buy or sell stocks, but I receive dividends twice a year, which cover my expenses. I don't want to live a fancy life. This house is managed by my brother. He has a maid stationed here, so I can use the house anytime. Huh? Freya exclaimed, momentarily at a loss for words. I followed up. So why are you here anyway? Let me guess. You just wanted to make sure I'm completely abandoned, didn't you? Yes, she confirmed. As you are aware, our family business is struggling, and I was hoping you would be willing to assist us. What's the point of this? I asked, keeping my expression neutral. When my father became ill, my husband took over as president, but he was inexperienced. As a relative, I thought it would be better if I took charge, so I assisted him in various ways, she explained. Do you mean that my son was merely an ornament for you to wield real power? I asked, my voice cold. That's exactly what I'm saying, she admitted. At this point, she must have concluded that her evasions were futile. Her explanation was accurate, though. What happened next? I pressed her. The product mix change that I had initiated failed, and we were saddled with massive losses and debt. I did everything I could to help, she confessed. So you're saying you've turned to me? I asked. That's correct, she replied. I let out a sigh. Do you want me to assist you with that? I added. Yes. I'd be enlightened to assist, she stammered. Do you remember what you told me? I interrupted. You said you would isolate me from your family because I'm a nuisance. What exactly are you saying and doing now? Is it not a bother to beg for money? Oh, it's for money, she said quietly. That is known as begging in this world, I continued. You are correct, Freya uttered. Right? I told her with a smile. I will decline. I don't want you to dismiss me. You've treated me so poorly, and now you want me to assist you. I apologize. I'm sorry, but I need, she said as she bent her knees, rubbing her chin against the floor. I didn't pay attention to her. I am not a person capable of giving alms to a beggar. Please leave, I concluded angrily. Please. The bank will no longer lend to me, and I have nowhere to rely on, she cried, still on her knees, her dress hem a mess. Please leave. I sincerely wish you the best. The visitor is leaving. Show her to the entrance, and for the last time, sprinkle some salt on them, I instructed my maid. The maids dragged her out of the room as she remained on her knees, refusing to move. I went back to my room, gazing out at the endless ocean, and softly murmured, I just want to live in peace. Later, I learned her company went bankrupt. She gave up her land and house to settle down, and with the little money left, she rented a small house and worked part-time. I returned to Irvine and have been living in my apartment ever since. When my son married and moved out, he bought a cat for me because he knew I'd be lonely. The cat, Zephyr, is a Maine Coon. He has long hair, making him difficult to care for, but he enjoys being brushed. Seeing his comfortable face makes me happy. Zephyr was in my arms, staring out the window with me. You were the size of my palm when you first arrived, but you've grown so much, I thought. Before I noticed, Zephyr had fallen asleep. It's true what they say about a sleeping child growing up. If you grow any larger, I won't be able to hold you, I whispered. brushing the tip of his nose. As I closed my eyes, Zephyr slept beside me. I'm going to have a good dream, I thought, as I drifted into sleep.